welcome back to the Rangers News YouTube channel. My name's James Black and I'm joined again by Jordan Carlisle, and we're going to have a little look ahead to Wednesday night's Premiership clash with St Johnstone at Ibrox. Now, after a free weekend, a rare free weekend at that for Rangers on Saturday, they're back in action on Wednesday night looking to extend their 23-point gap at the top of the Premiership. Celtic failed to capitalise in having a game in hand at the weekend there against St Mirren, losing 2-1 at home to the Buddies. And, it's a massive, massive step towards 55 and what's going to be a huge party come kind of April, March, May, maybe the back end of February if we're lucky. But going into the St Johnstone game, it's kind of a feeling of kind of as you were with everything for Rangers just now. We're doing this before Steven Gerrard speaks to the press on Tuesday, so we were maybe a wee bit in the dark in terms of injuries, but as things sit, there's nothing new come out. There's nobody new signed yet either, so we're a few hours ahead of the transfer deadline just now. And the only real team news is that Alfredo Morelos is going to miss out after the Rangers accepted a ban for his apparent stamp on Ryan Porteous at the weekend. So just kind of before we look at the game in a wee bit more detail, Jordan, I just kind of want to get your first thoughts on Rangers accepting the ban and just kind of the whole thing with Ryan Porteous and Morelos.
I don't know. For me, if you take it in isolation, I think away from all the context, that obviously I think the context is the main thing that people are talking about in terms of a lack of consistency, and I think that's clear. That's been demonstrated sort of with incidents across the last couple of seasons. There doesn't seem to be a huge amount of consistency in terms of decision makings from the SFA and compliance officer and that sort of stuff. I think if you look at it in isolation, it's a clear red card and a clear ban. So I've got no sort of issue with the decision in that way. I think, as I sort of said last, or when we were talking about it last, I think it's just overwhelming feeling. Watching the incident was frustration rather than outrage in any way. I just don't understand why he's doing stuff like that, and he got himself into a stage where he was looking a lot sharper, particularly in front of goal, and he was looking like he was starting to contribute and stuff again. And I think he should know at this point whether he gets sent off at the time or afterwards. A lot of the stuff that he does is heavily scrutinised, rightly or wrongly, and the guy's been here for years now. He's got to know that he can't do that. He's clearly done it on purpose. Now, Porteous is a massive wind-up merchant, and you can see that he would definitely. It would be hard not to rise to the stuff and the laughing and the physicality and stuff that he does across a game. I get that, but he's 24 or something now. He's not a wee boy. He's been there for a while, so he needs to be able to rise above that. And look, it might not cost, or it won't cost Rangers in terms of the league this year, but there's plenty of times in the past where it has, and he hasn't learned his lesson. So the whole system does need looking at. It needs to be clearer. There's just a lot of vagaries around the process and all that, and that needs clearing up. But he's got to look at himself and take a bit more responsibility, I think, going forward.
So moving on to the game with St Johnstone itself now, Murray Davis and Callum Davidson's side are not, I wouldn't say brilliant form just now, but they're in good enough form where I think on a 9-game unbeaten streak, they've just booked their place in the League Cup final. Is this a game on paper Rangers should kind of have a trepidation going into, or is it one where it's, given that it's at Ibrox, you're talking about a team who are sitting 8th in the Premiership table just now? Is it one you look at and you look at how many goals can you get and extend the goal difference as well?
It's certainly a game Rangers should be looking to win, and win comfortably if they play well. It's something where you can't ignore the form of an opposition team, and they've done well recently. That was a good performance in terms of getting into the League Cup final, and obviously a lot of the big teams have fallen away in that competition, but it's a big chance for them in that regard. And they've some decent young players. Ali McCann's a good player in the middle of the pitch and that sort of stuff. But Rangers should have too much quality in that regard. And just the way Rangers have been at Ibrox all season, it's just been amazing, hasn't it, in terms of just steamrolling teams and being very hard to score against. Mainly, I think St Johnstone scored 3, came from 2-0 down to beat Kilmarnock
at the weekend.
in at the weekend, and also they have that the League Cup final. So like they're in decent form, they'll be confident going into it. But I mean, they're not going to be able to play the same way as they have been playing. At Ibrox, Rangers are going to have a lot of the ball, and even without Morelos, you certainly. I was looking at Morelos' stats recently. I don't think he scored at Ibrox since the Lech Poznan game, which is months ago. So, I mean, they shouldn't miss him, or missing him isn't an excuse in terms of not producing goals, because he hasn't been doing that. And Rangers should have plenty in the game to get over the line.
I mean, we'll go into who will replace Morelos in a wee bit more depth in a little bit, but yeah, there's surely enough firepower there that you can take Morelos out that side, and you bring in Kamara Roof, you could bring in Cedric in, you've got Jermaine Defoe there as well. It's 3 guys who are not exactly shy in front of goal.
Yeah, exactly. I don't really know what the situation is with Defoe in terms of, I think Ian Crocker was saying in the last game
that missed, yeah,
that he had some sort of muscle injury. But there hasn't been a press conference since then, basically, because before that game, Jared said everyone was fine. So it must have just been in training on the Tuesday and the day before that he picked something up. So I don't know how serious that is, whether he'll be back involved or not again. Although I did notice on the Rangers website they have a picture of Defoe when they're talking about the match day program, which suggests to me that he's probably fine and available. But yeah, no, there's loads of quality there, options in terms of playing people straight through the middle and off the side, creative players, everything. So yeah, as I said, Morelos hasn't been producing as he has done in the past at Ibrox this year, so other players have done it. Otherwise, Rangers wouldn't be in this position. So they've got plenty of options.
One thing that Gerrard's not really been renowned for over his whole time at Rangers has been kind of keeping a steady 11. I mean, particularly maybe the last 18 months or so, it's been constant tinkering. Do you think with this week off that we've had, because the Scottish Cup game's getting cancelled, there's going to be at least one enforced change with Morelos coming out the side, but do you think it kind of gives you a wee bit more opportunity this to go with the roughly the same side and just get that wee bit of consistency going into what's likely to be the winning straight?
I think so, yeah. I think the players would appreciate that as well. That a lot of the guys who are playing or in that strongest 11, obviously everyone's going to want to play games, but it's probably like the Goldson mentality. I feel like you're literally never going to drop me. I'm sure a couple other players would wish they could get an extended run like that. So yeah, I think so. There is no real reason to rotate other than the fact that the lead is so comfortable, and he might want to try a few things. Like as things develop, I'd expect to see Zungu getting a bit more game time. Maybe players like that who are looking to win deals ahead of next season. I'd expect that to happen a bit more. But until it's actually tied up, I think he's going to try and keep it as strong as possible, isn't he? Really, and try and get over the line, because he doesn't want to give. Not that I think Celtic are in a position where they can have hope of any kind at this point, but he doesn't want to drop points unnecessarily by making changes and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's set up nicely to go for a full team and go hard on it.
So, I mean, moving on to the starting 11 itself, or at least what we think the starting 11 is going to look like. I mean, for me at least, it largely picks itself. I know there's been a lot of times in the season where you've maybe had probably as many as 4 or 5 positions where you could make a case where, there's 2 or 3 different players could come in. I think looking at just how things have kind of rolled out the last few weeks, you look at the fixtures, you look at the starting 11s, and you even look at some of the performances. For me, probably 10 or 11. Probably 10 at least of these players that automatically pick themselves. The obvious one, I mean, starting at the back, Alan McGregor, we're at the point now in the season, I think, where we saw the swapping between McGregor and John McLaughlin early on. It's been McGregor now consistently, everything bar Falkirk, I think, off the top of my head. There's maybe 1 or 2 other games in there where there's been a change, but it's been McGregor's jersey. That's going to continue this week on Wednesday night, I expect. Do you agree, yeah?
Yeah, that's just it's a difficult one for McLaughlin, obviously with the Euros coming up, because he's really not finding a way in, and maybe the Scottish Cup would have been that, but obviously that's on hold and stuff at the minute, and obviously the European stuff's going to get slightly more serious as well in the knockout, so it's hard to see him coming in until it's sort of settled in terms of the league. But yeah, obviously McGregor keeps going.
And moving on to the back four, three of the four. This is probably maybe one of two players probably there's a little bit of debate over, but for me, you've got Tavernier, Goldson, probably Helander, and Borna Barisic at left back. The last couple of weeks, Gerrard's kind of shown that wee bit more faith in Helander again, and I think the team looks more settled with him in it. I think the back four as a unit just looks that wee bit more composed. They look that wee bit more organised. And even Connor Goldson, who's been, he's been a colossus this season. I think he even looks just that little bit more comfortable and that little bit more confident having Helander beside him compared to having Balogun.
Yeah, I think their stats are very different. I've definitely covered this a few times before, in that Balogun is the pace and
Mm-hmm.
Hollander is the sort of street smart guy. His position is brilliant. And Balogun, I think, has it in him to make slightly more mistakes, but also has the pace to make up for them. Whereas Hollander is the guy that really you want in terms of just quality of defending. He's maybe not as good on the ball, or as athletic as Balogun, and I think maybe for home games against, in theory, slightly weaker opposition, Balogun maybe has more of a shout, because I think Hollander should be your go-to man against better sides,
Mm-hmm.
and better forwards. But so I think it is a bit of a, we've tried to predict it loads of times before, and it's looked like, it's Balogun's
We've
shirt
had it
now.
nailed on so many times.
Yeah, it's Balogun's shirt now, and then Hollander gets a game, then he gets two in a row, and then he swaps it again. So he's talked about managing them both, but obviously you don't really need to manage a player when there's been no game at the weekend. So that would suggest Hollander, but then that would also mean no Balogun for 3 games in a row. So he could change that. But see, to be fair, in terms of the records of both of them, in terms of actual concrete goals conceded rather than how the performance looks, there's very little between them, isn't there? Because Rangers have only conceded 7 goals or whatever it is at home so far this season. So it shouldn't matter a great deal whoever it is beside Goldson.
I mean, just to quickly touch on the two fullbacks as well. There's no much that we can say that hasn't been said about either of them really this season. But we're starting to see them coming back to their best again, because I think recently there's been a little bit of I don't want to say a dip in form, but almost a kind of dip in their attacking output. Uh, the last maybe game or two we've seen, particularly James Tavernier, I felt, has been a little bit more involved, and he's finding the ball been that wee bit better. We're kind of at that point again. Hopefully, we're going to start seeing those two marauding down the wings and really putting defences under pressure.
Yeah, I think for Tav, it was never going to be. He was on that ridiculous run where he's basically scoring and assisting every week for a while, and I think he said it himself. I can't remember what he's on in terms of goals, but I remember him speaking about. He was asked. I think it was because he had got to 16 or something. And he was only
After
halfway
the
through the
20.
season, and he was asked, look, can you get 30 from fullback? And he said, look, my target's 20. I think that was a sort of a realistic, or like a realization on his part, that like, it's unsustainable what he was doing, and that actually only a few more would help, or would be a good achievement. And I think that's shown in recent weeks. He's maybe struggled a bit more, and he's obviously missed a couple of penalties since then as well. But yeah, I think Barisic is. Sometimes I feel like there's just not enough there on the end for Barisic, rather than. I think his quality very rarely wavers. I think it's just very good consistently. He's maybe been slightly more reserved, whereas as Tav, there are differences at times. Like he'll have an absolute stormer, and then he'll have another game where he does struggle to beat the first man. But like, if the players on the end of the crosses, that's what's going to make them better. And sometimes I feel like there's not enough bodies in the 6 yard box, or attacking balls, and if there was, their numbers would be even better. But yeah, I mean, it's a good, the way where Rangers are in terms of their season. There should be nothing holding them back going forward to give them even more freedom the league table should do that. So yeah, absolutely not back against him being involved in the goals.
So moving on to the midfield three. Again, this is largely picks itself. Injuries have played a little part in that recently. We've seen Ryan Jack make his return to the side from injury. Scott Arfield's a partner not a long way away. Stephen Davis, Glenn Kamara have been there pretty much constantly. Joe Aribo's been putting in a decent shift. His performances maybe have been a little bit up and down since, I think pretty much since he returned earlier in the season. He's been a bit kind of up and down form-wise. But there's a few really interesting options there for Gerrard. How do you think they'll shape up against the Saints?
I think he might go for because it's at home, and again the context of the game. I think he might go for rather than I think the strongest three is Davis, Jack, and Kamara. In terms of if you're playing against really strong opposition, particularly games away from home. But I think he might go for two, sort of sitting in, and then Aribo in front of them. Sort of to add him to the front three, just because there's really no need not, or to be more conservative. I think you're picking three players who do a lot of their good work from sort of slightly more holding roles and can burst forward. But I don't think, like, they've all played a lot, or sorry, certainly Davis and Kamara played a lot recently. You don't need to rest either of them, but I think he could go Davis and Jack, leave Kamara on the bench for once, and have Aribo in front of them.
Would that selection be possibly tempered a little bit by who you'd play further forward? So having, because the one that kind of strikes me, and it may come across as a little bit unfair on both of them, but Hadji and Joe, I find it hard to have Hadji and Joe Aribo on the same side. I think defensively you lose a little bit by having them both. There's no question that creatively and offensively, the two of the best players in the country for that. But I think there's times when, particularly Hadji, can get a bit lazy and he's tracking back, and a bit slack in his challenging. And I think sometimes Joe Aribo can just vanish defensively. As harsh as it may sound on him, there's times where you hear his name and I forgot he was playing. And for me, it's always one that would kind of possibly balance off if you were maybe to give like Ryan Jack that little bit more freedom to get forward that we kind of seen earlier in the season. Seen it a little bit more again against Ross County when he came off the bench. That would be one for me possibly, but yeah, it's an interesting kind of decision, but how the two balance for me.
Yeah, I do think, like, Jack in particular has the ability to get forward. I do always think, though, that when he's done well, and when he went through that wee purple patch of scoring, a lot of them were from range and the ability to shoot from distance, because of the fact that he wasn't necessarily playing as an advanced midfielder. He was just coming from deep and not being picked up, because those in front of him were getting picked up, and they were leaving space for him on the edge of the box. So it's just at home. I think if you put Aribo in front of them, you don't need to. He doesn't need to be playing in a number 10 role out and out. He can just be slightly further forward, and Davis and Jack, given that responsibility to roam across both sides. I do get as well, in terms of Davis, if the amount of legwork that Kamara normally does at left back or on the left of midfield to cover for the left back, it's maybe hard to ask a 36-year-old to do quite as much as that. But I just don't think you need to have the three of them in there in home games against St Johnstone. Certainly at this stage of the season, in the context, I think Rangers should be going out. And
if I was to push you for a three, what three would it be?
Davis, Jack, and Aribo further forward. Yeah.
So moving on to the front three. So we know there's going to be at least one change here. We know for a fact there's going to be a change here. Morelos is going to come out the side because he's 3-match ban. So we'll leave who replaces Morelos till last, and we'll kind of look at the two wider positions first. Now, Ryan Kent for me is nailed on, stick on. He's playing left wing. It doesn't matter what day of the week it is, where you're playing, who you're playing, what the weather is, or anything else. Ryan Kent's going to be starting on the left.
Yeah.
On the right, it's a bit of a... Had Morelos not been banned, this would have probably been a little bit different, because I think there's been a really strong case for Kemar Roofe to come in. But with Morelos being out, you're probably going to look at Roofe leading the line, which you're going to then have probably Hadji on the right. And I think given how Hadji's played recently, I think how Gerrard's shown that wee bit more trust in him for me. You look at, there been a couple of games where I've been a wee bit surprised that he started them, just because it's the kind of game where Gerrard's going to take Hadji out for this one and bring in, like the Ross County game, for example. I kind of had a feeling he might have took Hadji out and brought in Roofe, given it was back and kind of ready to be thrown back in. And I think he's really starting to put in more consistent performances. I think as we spoke about just there are kind of deficiencies defensively from him, but I think going forward he can be so important for Rangers, and he's what Rangers need at times to unlock defences when games are getting stuffy and his teams are just sitting behind the ball.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you have, he's the guy that certainly if you have room in the team to try and get him in at the minute, I think he's got the joint most assists in the league with Tav, which is obviously an indicator of how much he provides. And even though he hasn't really, he had a couple of months spell where he wasn't really in the team. So yeah, I do think, obviously he said it's about leaving who's leading the line to last, but I do think they're sort of inextricably linked. So I think you could go Itten through the middle, and Roofe on the right. But the fact that Hadji didn't start and also didn't come on, at Hibs, I think,
yeah, you said
yeah,
Hadji there,
at Hadji, that he wasn't involved in the last game. I think there's every chance that he starts. So Kent on the left, Hadji on the right, and then it's just unlikely that with Roofe fit again that he's not going to play, especially with Morelos out and what he offers in terms of a goal threat. So it's harsh. Literally said every week or every couple of days, it's harsh on it that he still isn't starting. But I think he could well play a role off the bench in this game and then start at the weekend. But my front three would be Kent, Hadji, and Roofe.
I think too he's a little bit unfortunate just in that with Morelos not being available, it then limits the alternatives to Kemar Roofe or whoever starts. So you're going to have one in reserve, and it becomes a bit of a gamble starting them both and keeping Hadji on the bench, because if one gets injured, you start shuffling more bits around. So he's kind of a victim of circumstance a little bit for that for me. But yeah, it's going to be Roofe, I think. And you look at the guy's goal scoring rate. How do you argue against it?
No, he's brilliant, and he just brings. I do think it's a strange one, because Morelos has been very frustrating for me at times this year, and I know he's played a different role and stuff like that, but in terms of his approach to things at times and his output, I don't think it's been enough. But it also just literally the player he is and what he brings physically and in terms of his threat, whether that's in reality or his perceived threat to defenses. I think he adds a lot leading the line that maybe they sort of lose with Roofe in terms of he doesn't have the physicality. I think he's not really convinced in the air sometimes in terms of what threat he carries in the air. But in terms of cleverness of movement in and around the box, he's the best player Rangers have in terms of that. So there's every chance he does a good job leading the line, and if things aren't going well, he can shift outside and bring it on the second half, and it's a good option to have.
So I mean that will give us a starting 11: McGregor, Tavernier, Goldson, Helander.
Yeah.
Barisic, Davis, Jack, Joe Rebo, Hadji, Ryan Kent, and Kemar Roofe. I think on paper that is probably the strongest on paper 11 that Rangers probably have. It's maybe a little bit unfair on Glenn Kamara. I think when you balance everything out, I think the pieces all fit together just that little bit better.
I think for a home game, yeah. for an away game. If it was an Old Firm, I don't think it's the strongest team Rangers have, but I think Jared's sort of spoken about that before. He doesn't really feel like he has the strongest 11. It's a game by game basis and stuff like that. So I think Kamara's been brilliant. I just don't think you need all three in this game, and the other two have a better range of passing. So I think that brings him in for or gives him advantage for this one.
Just to throw a quick wee curveball in there as well, because I love doing this. Now, as we record this, it is 4:45 on Monday night. Jack Simpson is apparently at the Rangers training centre undergoing a medical ahead of a move tonight. If he signs before the deadline, do you chuck him in for a debut off the bench?
I think it would probably be too soon in terms of the fact that they say that he's literally just travelled up today. He'll be at the ground, I imagine, if he goes through it. First game at the ground, and then maybe he travels on Sunday to Hamilton. But it's a case of George Edmondson. Obviously, he's been banned and stuff, but he hasn't even been, before that, he wasn't even guaranteed to be in the matchday squad as the fourth choice centre back. And I think that's what Simpson will be. Certainly at the start, given how well everyone else has done. So I think it might be slightly different if you get a Scott Wright in, who's already been in the country, knows the league and stuff like that, and is an attacking player. I think there's a chance that if he came in before the deadline, he's someone you could literally just stick in the squad because he knows what it's all about and would be ready to go, and it's sort of an exciting option. So that might be slightly different, but whether that's done or not, who knows?
Magic, that's brilliant. Well, that is all we have got time for this episode. Have a look back later in the week on our YouTube channel. We will have videos looking back at everything else that's going on around Rangers this week. We'll have a look at the transfer window, most likely, and some other content coming for you. So thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and cheers.